The midday sun scorched the dry Oklahoma soil as dust swirled lazily in the breeze, coating everything in a soft, brown haze. In the center of the Miller Ranch corral, a horse lay collapsed on its side, ribs protruding like warped fence boards beneath its dull, patchy coat. His chest rose and fell so shallowly that it was barely noticeable. Around the perimeter, 5 weathered ranch hands stood in silence, watching from beneath the brims of their sun-bleached hats. None of them spoke, but the look in their eyes said everything. They'd seen this before. The horse wasn't going to make it. Kneeling in the dirt beside the animal was Eira Thornridge, her dress gathering dust as she leaned forward and cupped the horse's head in her hands. She wasn't from here. That much was obvious. From her clean, soft hands to the gentle way she whispered to the animal as if it could understand. A schoolteacher from Tulsa, Eira had come to town for feed and fencing supplies. But something had drawn her to the run-down pen near the barn, where the broken horse was being kept like yesterday's mistake. From the fence, Brannick Vole, the ranch's grizzled owner, shifted his weight with a grunt. "Ain't worth $50, he muttered to Calrick Dustmore, the stoic foreman beside him. "Hell, he's barely breathing." Calrick said nothing. None of them did. They'd all seen their share of dying livestock. Some things just couldn't be saved. But Eira wasn't looking for logic. She had stared into the horse's eyes and seen something familiar. Something hurt. Something waiting. She'd bought him on the spot, ignoring every warning. Dresden Maller, the youngest of the crew, had tried to stop her. Colrin Vask had scoffed openly. But it was Jareth Moonvale who had stayed quiet the longest, his eyes studying Eira like he was trying to remember something. Something long buried. The others didn't notice, but Jareth did, how Dusty had lifted his head, just slightly, when Eira first touched him. She named him Dusty, not for the dirt, but for the way he felt, like something once brilliant, now forgotten. Eira didn't know why she felt drawn to him. She only knew that she couldn't leave him there to die. The world had already turned its back on her once. Maybe saving Dusty was the only way to save herself. Behind her, Brannick crossed his arms tighter, his brow furrowing. Because for just a second, Dusty's ear twitched, like he recognized her. The barn smelled of old hay, saddle leather, and something faintly metallic, like dried blood and rust. Eira Thornridge sat on a wooden stool near Dusty's stall, the soft creak of wood beneath her the only sound breaking the stillness. The horse hadn't moved much since they brought him in. Brannick Vole had wanted to keep him outside, assuming he wouldn't last through the night, but Eira insisted. She needed him warm, sheltered, and close. Even if he died, she wanted him to die knowing someone had cared. Calrick Dustmore had helped her carry him in. For a man of few words, he seemed oddly gentle when handling Dusty. He hadn't asked why she bought the horse. He didn't mock her for it, either. He just nodded when she told him she believed the horse still had something left inside him. That night, Calrick left her a bucket of clean water, a handful of alfalfa, and a wool blanket. Nothing else was said. Dusty's breathing was steadier now, though his body trembled every so often, like his muscles were trying to remember how to feel safe again. Eira ran her fingers lightly through his tangled mane, whispering the same words over and over like a lullaby. "You're not alone anymore." Her voice cracked on the last word. She didn't know why it hurt so much to say it. Maybe because, deep down, she wasn't sure if it was true for herself either. Later that evening, Neria Coldmere, the town sheriff, stopped by the ranch to drop off paperwork. She noticed the light in the barn and wandered over. "Heard you bought yourself a dead horse," she said with a dry chuckle, leaning in the doorway. Eira didn't look up. "He's not dead," she replied quietly. "Just tired of being forgotten." Neria studied her for a long moment before muttering, "We all get that way." The next morning, Jareth Moonvale stood outside the barn, watching from a distance. He'd seen a lot of things in his years on the ranch, births, deaths, storms, and droughts, but something about Dusty unsettled him. There was something too familiar in the way the horse moved, in his hesitation, in his haunted eyes. Jareth rubbed his temple and stared harder, trying to chase away a memory that refused to come fully into view. Inside, Eira wiped Dusty's muzzle with a damp cloth. As she leaned closer, the horse slowly opened one eye and looked directly at her. Not through her, at her. And in that moment, something electric passed between them. It wasn't just recognition. It was remembrance. The night had settled in like a heavy blanket, smothering the last warmth of the sun. A single lantern hung from a hook inside the barn, casting long, swaying shadows across the wooden walls. Eira Thornridge hadn't left Dusty's side in nearly 24 hours. Her back ached, her eyelids fought to close, but she stayed there, listening to the slow, steady rhythm of the horse's breathing. It had become a kind of anchor for her, a heartbeat louder than her own. She kept thinking about that look he'd given her. Not confusion, not fear, recognition. That was the part she couldn't explain. There was no logical reason why a half-dead animal would look at her like he knew her. But he had. And it hadn't felt like a moment. It felt like a return. Like something broken snapping back into place. Outside, the wind kicked up a thin whistle through the slats of the barn wall. Eira stood and walked to the stall door, looking out into the night. A shadow moved beyond the corral fence. She froze. It wasn't a wild animal. She knew that gait. A man. Slowly, he stepped into the glow of the lanternlight. Colren Vask, arms crossed, face unreadable. "Brannock wants to know how long you're planning on turning our barn into a charity ward," he said flatly. Eira didn't flinch. "As long as he needs it." Colren scoffed, shook his head, and turned to leave. "You're chasing ghosts, Thornridge." But the way he said it, it wasn't cruel. It was almost nervous. That same night, in the bunkhouse, Jareth Moonvale sat on the edge of his cot, staring at an old photograph. He'd pulled it out of a leather-bound journal buried deep in his trunk. The photo was faded and creased, taken sometime in the early 90s. A girl and a mare, both standing in front of the exact same barn Eira now stood in. The girl couldn't have been older than 7. Her face blurry, but familiar. He turned the photo over. A name was scrawled on the back in faint blue ink, Eira Thornridge. His hand tightened around the edges of the picture. That name hadn't been spoken in over 20 years. But now it was echoing again. In the girl's eyes, in the horse's stare, in the pieces that didn't fit. And deep inside the barn, as Dusty slept, his hooves twitched slightly, as if galloping through dreams he hadn't dared to remember. Until now. Eira Thornridge held the photograph between her fingertips, her brow furrowed. Jareth Moonvale had left it on a hay bale outside the barn before sunrise. No note, no explanation. Just the picture. She recognized the setting instantly, the barn behind her. But the little girl, standing tall beside a young mare with a white blaze down her face, that girl stirred something in Eira's chest. Something she didn't have words for. Her mother had never shown her photos from before they moved to Tulsa. Her past had always been sealed behind quiet eyes and unfinished sentences. Turning the photo over, Eira read the name again. Eira Thornridge. Her mother. The name hit like a gust of cold wind. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years. Eira had died when Eira was 15. Car crash. Sudden. No goodbyes. And afterward, her belongings had been boxed up by relatives and whisked away without ceremony. Now, this forgotten image of her, so young, so alive, appeared like a whisper from the other side. Eira's fingers trembled as she stared at the mare in the photo. Was it Dusty? Could it be? She hurried back to the stall and stared at Dusty as he stood weakly, but alert. The markings were close. The eyes, almost identical. Her mind swirled. Could this be the same horse? That would make him, what? 25? Older? No. That was impossible. Wasn't it? At the main house, Brannock Vole sat at the breakfast table with Neria Coldmere, the sheriff, sipping coffee and staring through the window toward the barn. The girls poking into things that ought to stay buried, Brannock said without looking away. Neria tapped her fingernail against the rim of her cup. You knew Eira, didn't you? She asked. Brannock didn't answer right away. Then, she left for a reason. Neria leaned back. Funny thing about buried things, they have a way of crawling out on their own. Back at the barn, Eira pulled an old, dust-covered ledger from a locked cabinet Caelric Dustmore had shown her. Inside, handwritten notes about the ranch's horses over the last 30 years. She flipped pages quickly, heart racing, until she found it. May 1999, new foal born. Mother, Solace. Foal markings, blaze face, left hind sock. Owner, Eira Fenbrook. The name of the foal was scribbled in pencil. Dustmore. Eira dropped the book. She stumbled back toward Dusty's stall, staring at him with new eyes filled with questions and fear. Dusty wasn't just a rescue. He was a connection to a mother she never really knew, and a secret that someone on this ranch had tried very hard to bury. The sound of the ledger hitting the ground echoed louder than it should have in the quiet barn. Eira Thornridge stood frozen, her chest rising and falling as if the air had turned to smoke. The name scratched into the yellowed page, Dustmore, wasn't just familiar. It was the name Caelric Dustmore carried. A last name that, until now, had meant nothing more than a quiet, brooding ranch hand who avoided eye contact. But now, it felt like a thread tugging loose everything she thought she understood. She turned slowly toward Dusty's stall. The horse watched her, unmoving, his tired eyes calm but alert. Eira stepped closer, her voice cracking. "Is that your name?" she whispered. "Dustmore." The horse didn't respond, of course, but she swore, just for a moment. His ears shifted, as if listening. Outside the barn, footsteps approached. Eira quickly tucked the ledger under the blanket pile just as Caelric stepped inside, a bale of hay balanced on his shoulder. His face was unreadable, as always. "You're up early," he said. Eira forced a small nod, trying to keep her voice steady. "Couldn't sleep." Caelric set the hay down slowly. "That happens around here," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Especially when the past starts walking around again." Eira's breath caught. She hadn't said anything. Not about the photo. Not about the ledger. Not about her mother. And yet, something in his voice, subtle, quiet, told her he knew. Not everything, but enough. She stepped forward cautiously. "Caelric, do you know who Dusty really is?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes lingered on the horse, then shifted to her. "I knew a mare named Solace," he said softly. "She belonged to a girl who used to sing to her every morning before chores. That girl disappeared one night, and no one ever talked about why." Eira felt her legs weaken. Her mother. Eira. Caelric's eyes darkened. "This place has long memories," he murmured. "But some names get erased, some faces forgotten, on purpose." Eira wanted to scream, to demand answers. But instead, she reached into her pocket and handed him the photo. He stared at it for a long time, jaw tightening, then gave the smallest nod. "You have her eyes." Outside the barn, Brannock Vole watched the exchange from the window of his house, his hand tightening around a chipped coffee mug. He muttered to himself, barely audible, "She should have never come back." The morning light filtered through the barn slats in streaks of gold and gray. Dust floated lazily in the beams, and Eira Thornridge sat on an overturned feed bucket, staring at the stall where Dusty stood quietly chewing hay. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full. full of questions, full of echoes from a past she was only just beginning to uncover. Caelric Dustmore hadn't said anything more after confirming the photo. He'd walked out of the barn with a look on his face that said more than words ever could. But Eira couldn't stop thinking about what he'd told her. Her mother had disappeared. No explanations. No goodbyes. And now here she was, face to face with a horse that had once belonged to her, and a man who seemed to carry pieces of that history in silence. She walked to the main house, clutching the old ranch ledger to her chest. She didn't knock. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Brannock Vole stood at the sink, rinsing out his mug. He didn't turn around. "I know who he is," Eira said, voice steady despite the storm inside her. "Dusty. His name is Dustmore. He belonged to my mother." Brannock turned slowly, face hardened. "That horse should have been dead 20 years ago." Eira took a breath. "But he's not. And neither is the truth." Brannock sat at the table, motioning for her to do the same. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "Your mother came here when she was 19. She worked this land like she was born for it. She had a gift with horses. Especially that foal, Dustmore. No one could get near him but her." Eira listened, wide-eyed. Brannock's voice grew softer, edged with guilt. "She fell in love with someone she shouldn't have," he continued. "Someone the town didn't approve of. And when things got complicated, she vanished overnight. No word, no note, just gone. We kept Dustmore for a while. Then he disappeared too." A lump formed in Eira's throat. Who did she love? Brannock didn't answer. He only stared out the window, eyes fixed on the barn. "Some secrets were meant to die with us." Eira stood. But they didn't. She left the house, heart pounding. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees as if the land itself was stirring. As she approached the barn, Jareth Moonvale stepped out from behind the water trough. "You need to hear what I know," he said quietly. And for the first time since her arrival, Eira realized. She wasn't the only one Dustmore had remembered. The barn door creaked as the wind pushed it open, and Eira Thornridge stood frozen just outside, facing Jareth Moonvale. His expression was different now, less guarded, more burdened. He looked like a man who had carried a secret so long it had become part of his posture. Eira stepped forward slowly, her voice steady but low. "What do you know about my mother?" Jareth didn't answer immediately. He looked past her toward Dusty's stall, where the old horse stood calmly, as if listening. "Eira wasn't just a ranch hand," he finally said. "She was more than that. To all of us. But especially to one man." His eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the horizon behind her. "Brannock." Eira's stomach turned. "Brannock Vole? My mother." Jareth nodded. "He was in love with her. Deeply. But he couldn't show it. Not then. There was pressure, expectations. He was already engaged to someone else. His family owned this land. Eira worked it. That was enough to start whispers." He paused, his voice heavy. "When she found out she was pregnant, everything exploded." Eira took a step back, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. "Pregnant?" Jareth nodded again, slower this time. "She told Brannock. Said she wanted to raise the child here. He told her it wasn't possible. That his name, his family, wouldn't survive the scandal." His jaw tightened. "She left that night. No warning. No goodbye. Only Dustmore stayed behind." Eira felt her knees weaken. Her mind spun, trying to connect the dots, trying to believe what her gut already suspected. "You're saying, Brannock is my father?" The silence that followed was louder than any answer. Jareth didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. Instead, he placed something in her hand. A small silver locket, tarnished with age. "Your mother gave this to me the night she left," he said. "Told me to keep it safe. Said someday, a girl with her eyes would come asking questions." Eira opened it. Inside was a faded photo. Her mother, much younger, smiling with a man whose face had been torn out. But behind them stood the same barn. The same fencing. The same horse. Everything she thought she knew about herself, her past, was being rewritten in real time. And Dust Moore, was the last living witness. Eira looked up at Jareth, eyes wet. "Why now? Why are you telling me this?" He sighed. "Because the truth was never mine to keep. And because Dust Moore came back for a reason." The old ranch house creaked as Eira Thornridge stepped inside, her boots heavy with dust and dread. Brannock Vole wasn't in the kitchen, nor on the porch. She knew he was avoiding her. After what Jareth Moonvale had told her, the silence spoke louder than any confession. But Eira wasn't there for a conversation. She was there for proof. For something no one could twist or deny. She climbed the narrow stairs to the attic, a place that smelled of time, aged wood, dry paper, forgotten memories. The floor groaned beneath her as she moved carefully past trunks and boxes, old tools and yellowed ledgers. Then she saw it, a small wooden chest tucked beneath a faded saddle blanket. It had no lock. Just a rusted clasp and a layer of dust thick as silence. Inside were letters, bundles of them, tied with twine. Most were from Eira Fenbrook. The handwriting was unmistakable. Soft curves, firm strokes. One envelope had no address, only a name, Brannock. Eira untied the string and unfolded the pages with care, her eyes scanning the faded ink. "I told you I was leaving for my sake. But that was a lie. I left because you told me there was no place for our child here. You were afraid. I was too. But I never stopped loving you. I see you in her eyes. I hope someday you'll have the courage to see her too." The letter slipped from Eira's hand. Her fingers trembled, not from shock, but from the weight of truth settling into place. Brannock hadn't just turned his back on her mother. He had turned his back on her. His daughter. Footsteps creaked on the stairs behind her. She turned to see Brannock standing in the doorway, his face pale, older than she remembered just hours ago. His voice came low and strained. "You weren't supposed to find that." Eira stared at him, rage and sorrow burning in her throat. "Why did you let me grow up not knowing?" Brannock stepped further into the attic. "Because I was a coward. Because I thought silence would protect everyone. I lost her. And then I thought, maybe it was better if I never looked back." Tears welled in Eira's eyes. "But you did look back. You just didn't want to see what was staring right at you." Downstairs, Dust Moore stirred in his stall, as if he, too, could feel the long-buried truth rising to the surface. As if every step Eira took toward it was waking something old, raw, and unfinished. And outside the barn, Caelric Dust Moore stood silently by the fence, watching the wind turn cold. The next morning brought an eerie calm to the ranch. The air was colder, heavier, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Eira Thornridge sat outside the barn with the letter in her lap, her fingers tracing the faded edges. She hadn't spoken to Brannock Vole since the confrontation in the attic. He hadn't come out of the house. But something told her he wasn't hiding this time. He was grieving, for the years lost, for the choices made, and for a daughter he'd only now begun to see. Inside the barn, Dust Moore stood taller. He was eating more, moving easier. The hopeless, broken creature she had rescued was gone. In his place was something older, wiser, like he had finally finished a long journey back to the beginning. Eira watched him closely, knowing in her gut that his transformation wasn't just physical. He had been waiting for this. For her. For the truth. Caelric Dustmore appeared at the barn's edge, leaning against the doorframe. "I heard about the letter," he said quietly. "I was just a boy when your mother left. Brannock was never the same after that. He worked harder, spoke less. When Dustmore disappeared, it was like he buried them both in the same grave." Eira looked at him, her voice soft but steady. "Why didn't anyone ever tell me?" Caelric shrugged. "Out here, we don't talk about pain. We brand it, bury it, and call it part of the land." Eira nodded slowly, absorbing his words. She turned back to Dustmore. He remembered. Even after all these years. He remembered my mother. He remembered me. That afternoon, Jareth Moonvale gathered the others in the barn. Caelric, Calrin Vask, Dresden Maller, and even Safra Eloan, the ranch's quiet caretaker who rarely left the feed shed. They stood around Dustmore's stall like old soldiers returning to a battlefield. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Jareth stepped forward and placed his hand on the horse's neck. He outlived all of it. The lies. The silence. The shame. Calrin muttered under his breath, or maybe he carried it. For all of us. Eira looked around at the faces hardened by years in the sun, all cracked in the same quiet way. For once, no one argued. No one deflected. They simply stood there, together, while Dustmore stared back at them, still, calm, present. As dusk fell over the fields, Brannock Vole emerged from the house. He didn't speak. He just walked slowly across the yard and stood beside his daughter for the first time. The sun sank low behind the hills, casting the ranch in hues of amber and rust. A soft wind passed through the corral, whispering through the tall grass and lifting dust into slow spirals. Eira Thornridge stood beside Brannock Vole, silent. The two hadn't exchanged more than a few words, but something had shifted between them. Not resolution, not yet, but recognition. A beginning. Inside the barn, Dustmore stood tall, his coat clean, his eyes clear. The weakness that once clung to him like fog was gone. He was whole again. Strong. As if carrying the truth had weighed on him all these years, and now, freed of it, he could finally rest. Eira brushed his mane gently, whispering the words her mother once had. "You're home." Brannock approached the stall slowly. He didn't look at Eira, not at first. Instead, he placed a rough, weathered hand on Dustmore's neck. His voice was barely more than a breath. "I never deserved her forgiveness. But maybe I can try to earn yours." Eira turned to him. The anger she'd carried had dulled into something deeper. Sorrow, maybe. Or understanding. "I don't need you to explain," she said softly. "But I need you to show up. From now on." He nodded, the weight of decades pressing into that small motion. It wasn't a promise. But it was something close. In the following days, the ranch began to change. Brannock started working beside the hands again. Caelric Dustmore repaired the broken fence around the east field. Safra Eloan cleaned the old tack room, humming tunes no one had heard in years. And Eira stayed. She wrote her resignation letter to the school in Tulsa and moved into the ranch house's old guest room, where the curtains still smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. One morning, as Eira walked Dustmore along the ridge trail behind the barn, she noticed something sparkling in the dirt. A tiny metal tag, rusted but still legible. It read simply, "Solace." She smiled. That was the name of Dustmore's mother. She looked out across the open land, golden in the morning light, and felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. The secrets were no longer buried. The past had been seen. And through it all, the bond between a girl and a horse had done what silence never could. It had told the truth.